All right, let's start with an introduction. Tell us just a little bit about why you're in the what I call the high attribute meat business, and what is it that you think your customers find most important in a higher than commodity attribute in meat? We'll start with Dr. Thomas.
Thank you for your attention and letting me be here today to represent Applegate. We are a natural and organic meat company that has been in business for 30 years. Our mission is changing the meat we eat, and we've been doing that for 30 years. Started out with no nitrates, a very simple concept, went to no antibiotics ever, 100% grass-fed beef recently, and even more recently, all of our meat products have a third-party animal welfare certification program in place. So we're taking steps slowly, but at areas that seem to fit what the consumer is asking. So that's basically what we do for our program. We have more challenges to meet, and we look forward to that opportunity.
I have been with the Audubon Society now for 10 years. The National Audubon Society was incorporated in 1905, began actually as a group of societies in 1900. And so Audubon has been around for well over 100 years and has a credible, very well-known mission of bird conservation and ecosystem conservation. And in this part of the country, we have a number of probably 15 different grassland birds that are in steep decline. And so for the National Audubon Society and through its Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, which is essentially one of the largest conservation-based, market-based grasslands conservation programs. It's really about protecting those birds and the associated habitat. And when, I often say this, when the 10-gallon hats, belt buckles, and boots are gone from the landscape, so will the mission of the National Audubon Society, because so will those birds. And so many of the ecosystem services that cattle ranching provides, clean water, the grassland habitat itself, the grassland ecosystem itself, pollinators out on the landscape. So that's why we're in this space and operating here with our program.
A farmer walked in the back door of his kitchen. His wife was cooking supper, and he had a duck under his arm. And he said, "This is the pig I was telling you about." And she turned around and said, "That ain't no pig, that's a duck." He said, "I'm talking to the duck." So I started out with something a little bit funny, because what we're talking about up here is not much fun and it's not funny, but it's important. Saying the first time I think I saw animal welfare and farm animal in the same context was in Drover's magazine in about 2003. And I said, I thought that's a good idea. And I became the first, my farm, Waterloo Pastures, became the first farm east of the Mississippi to be certified humane, first beef cattle farm. And from there, the certification industry has just mushroomed. And today, it's a very tedious business. There's a tremendous amount of confusion on the part of the consumer. And make no mistake, much of that confusion is by design, low-hanging fruit type certifications that just allow companies to put something on the package. It's expensive, it's time consuming, but it's necessary. You know, those of us who farm the way we farm choose to give up the tools that take cost out of production. When we do that, we add cost back to production. When we do, we've got to extract more value back out of the consumer to pay for the added cost of production. So some form of verification is necessary and important, even though it's expensive and confusing. So I guess we're going to talk more about that. And
My name is Matt Meyer, and I have the great fortune of following Will Harris on the panel, with no jokes. Well, Thousand Hills is a grass-fed beef brand, and we market to the supernatural retail channel, which in layman's terms is food co-ops and natural food stores. And we really target it on the retail end of it and try to sell everything from ground beef brick to bone broth to get as much value out of the carcass as we can. We've been around for 15 years. Todd was our founder, and seen a lot of change. And we just embarked on a third-party certification process this year for the first time after a lot of thinking and wondering about it with the American Grass-Fed Association. We felt like that aligned with our protocol the closest. But we do find buyers in that channel looking for some type of certification because they know I'm biased and they want someone else who's not biased to certify what we're promising when we're delivering a high integrity product. So we felt it was a move that was necessary, and it is difficult, and we're willing to share more as we go here.
Hi, I'm the forgotten Leslie Moore down here.
The forgotten Leslie Moore,
the
yes.
forgotten.
Sorry, Leslie. I'm never going to hear the end of this.
I'll just speak louder. With Farmer Girl Meats, like I think many in the audience, we are the typical story of a small family farm. I am the child come back to the ranch who is picking up the supply chain marketing arm. Todd asked the question of, basically, why am I in this business, which I think really does get to the heart of the question for each of us. We talk a lot internally about selling the why, not the what. So when I think about that for Farmer Girl Meats, it's definitely our why, and our primary marketing claim sits around the passion I feel personally for small family farms, the artistry and the craft nature of what they do. It's just best in class. And obviously, with deep family roots in small town ranching, that's something that I want to survive. So when I look at it for us, versus John Wood, they've done a great job. Health. I mean, U.S. Wellness Meats. They have a passion for health. I have a passion for the quality and product integrity of a craft product, and for keeping our small ranchers alive and thriving and growing that network. So we try to build our claims and our products, and that's our message out. Having said that, and I think we're going to get there in the conversation, we have some things on the claim front we got to check the boxes on just to get our consumer to look at us. So these cost of entry claims that have to be met, really. And I think another really great discussion for today is, I couldn't agree with Will more. It's really important for our industry to understand that we have a high cost production model, and our claims are the way we have to have a premium pricing. That's how we justify the cost. I say that all the time. The claims justify the cost. There is a strategic way to move into a claim. If you cannot move direct to some of these third-party certifiers, I think as you're growing your business, there is a way to strategically move in that direction if you can't take the leap all at once. And I think we'll probably discuss that.
All right, so next question. How do you know what your customers value, which kind of claims your customers value, and how do you determine that? Do you do customer research? Is it just kind of a guess, gut feel? But what drives your sense of what matters to your customers? Go ahead, whoever wants to start.
Well, from our perspective, we need to get through the gatekeeper, who is the buyer. So a lot of pressure is applied at the buyer level, supposedly based upon the consumer feedback that they're hearing in their stores. Sometimes it's just a biased view of what they feel is important, or what they feel the consumer's looking for. And you know, we pay a lot of attention to that, because if we don't get through the gatekeeper, we don't get on the shelf. So that there's a constant education process that we find where, well, here are our claims, and you know, here's how we manage these different elements of these different claims. And so you kind of sift through that and in a way take a poll of what buyers on the B2B level are looking for. So that helps us to prioritize as to what do we seek out from a third-party basis.
I think there are two things. I think that the first is you need to know your customer. You got to know something about them. You got to know what message you need to deliver to them. In our case, our customers are focused on animal welfare. So we have some animal welfare verifications. They're focused on the environmental impact. So we have EOV, environmental outcome verification from Savory. And then the impact on the local community, which is much harder to verify. But knowing your customer, knowing what they're looking for is important. The other thing is there are messages that you may feel compelled to send to the customer. They may not know they need to know that. Right now, if you in this audience, and if you raise, produce, market, sell grass-fed beef, the biggest economic problem you have today is imported grass-fed beef that's marked product of the USA. You may not know it, but it is eating your margins up. And we are one of the certifications I'm most proud of today is the American Grass-Fed Association, because it's the only certification I got that is domestic, talks about American production. So.
Yeah, we're a little bit unique in the sense that before our program, again, the Audubon Society has been around with its mission of protecting the places birds need today and tomorrow for 100 years. And so our first kind of embedded customers have to be our members. And we have somewhere around 3 million members nationwide. And so our standards have to be consistent with what they expect from the National Audubon Society. Now that's a little bit interesting, because if you look at the footprint of our membership, it may not be the exact footprint of where we're working all the time. And so our customer base is obviously our members, but it's also the various audiences that our brands and our ranches that we're working with are trying to target. And so it's sometimes, first and foremost, we have to create a standard that lives up to the expectation of the National Audubon Society's mission, but then we also have to work and be flexible in how we support the market targeting of our various ranches and branded programs. And so to the question, I think we've built a program that's consistent with the expectation of our members, and we're learning more and more, and it's not easy, what our targeted customers in different markets expect from our brand. So that's the learning process that we're going through.
All right.
We have a strong consumer relations department within Applegate. So our consumers talk directly to us via telephone, via Twitter, Facebook. We get immediate and constant feedback from many of our consumers. So that's one aspect. We sell into the supernatural grocers as well. They have specifications for being able to sell into some of their stores. We also sell into conventional grocery stores, which they are starting to question, why do we need these labels? Our consumers are telling this, but even we don't know about what these labels and what these programs mean. So it's a multifaceted effort to know what the consumers want and try to forecast what the consumers want. We know that we're never going to keep everybody, each and every consumer happy, but they are driving the market. So we are very focused on transparency and connecting with the consumers. very, very far removed from farming. Our company is based in New Jersey and has been there for 30 years, as I mentioned. So we take so much effort, and if you'll check out our website at applegate.com, to connect our consumers with the producers. That's what we have to do. That's what we want to do. We want to tell the stories. I personally have been on the production end of things as well, so I know the challenges and benefits of direct marketing, but on a scalable product across the nation sales, it takes a lot of stories and a lot of communication. So those are our efforts to try to engage consumers completely.
Thank you. Next question. Do you think consumers are willing to pay more for products that have third-party claims? And perhaps more importantly, to Matt's point, one of my great frustrations when I owned Thousand Hills was buyers who wanted the claims but didn't want to pay for them. And I would say what you're essentially asking for is a don't ask, don't tell. You want to be able to make the claim, but you don't want to pay me to actually create a supply chain with integrity. And that, how do we deal with that?
So, okay, that's a really good question right off the bat. So, yes, consumers are willing to pay. Our market wouldn't work really if they weren't, right? Because we have this cost structure. So inherently, it has to be value added for them. What I think the distinction there is when you're trying to scale your operation from direct to indirect, when you're direct, you have a high cost structure, more so than when you can make it to the point where you have the volume and the efficiencies to get to indirect.
Why don't you explain those?
So direct to consumer, right, where I'm still having a personal relationship with you, and you are buying me my farm brand, my ranch brand, or my co-op, my intimate group of ranchers directly, versus a buyer, right? So those are just distinct business models. A younger business model is direct, and then at some point you advance to working with buyers. So, I think the issue there is at what point, my perspective here is that claims matter when you go to the buyer. I mean, the certifications matter when you go to the buyer. Mm-hmm. But at 20 head or 50 head, you are not ready to go to a buyer on your own, right? So, because your cost is too high. So they don't want to pay, so you can't make that relationship work, right? They don't want to pay you for the claim because you're still gaining those efficiencies. So what makes most sense is until you get your efficiencies and your scale up, I believe, is as a direct to consumer, because that's the channel, that's where we work, so I'll bring that perspective to the table, is that you have this opportunity to work your way into the claim, the certification. And that is how you get your cost structure down, et cetera, over time and build your consumer base. So work your way into that point with your efficiencies. The way we do it, one thing I would recommend right off the bat to anybody here going direct to consumer, get your animal protocol, your feeding protocol, animal husbandry protocol, and raising protocol, get them on a website. Your website will be your claim, right? It's cheap. Get a website, put your protocols front and center, and then you get that conversation almost out of the way so that you can have a conversation with the consumer you really want to, right? So in the direct-to-consumer market, you're not facing that question yet, Todd. You're not worked to that level. Yeah. But you can start building your credibility in the space and building your way into the certification by doing that. Go online, find a protocol templates. When you go home, get something written, make it true to what you do, get it online. Once you publish, I firmly believe, once you publish something, you are forced to be transparent. And as a direct-to-consumer, that's what our direct-to-consumer channel is looking for, is that transparency. So kind of off topic, that's a way, that's a way you can start building a foundation for moving into certification in that channel.
Got it.
So will a consumer pay more for a certified product? or with claims. Let's just start with claims. Well, our product costs more than conventional beef. So the basic answer is yes, they'll pay more. Now, as you stack on certifications, will, in my experience, a buyer immediately say, oh, gee, if you add that certification, I'll give you 25 cents a pound more? No way. No, 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 no. Not going to happen. But I believe that a certification can differentiate you in the marketplace. And with that differentiation, over time, you can command more of a premium because you have that claim, that certification, that third party built out and more believable over time. And then, in my experience, when you're selling to a buyer whose values are somewhat or aligned with your values, they are much more likely to appreciate the effort that goes into the claim and thus goes into the certification. But no immediate ROI. It's a longer term investment, and I view it as a investment in differentiation, which ultimately, God willing, leads to a premium.
So, so there's a corollary to that then, because producers who don't really interact with these large-scale buyers oftentimes would ask me, or I'm sure they ask you now, okay, well, if I get certified, how much more are you going to pay for that? And the answer is always, I don't have anything else to pay you because I'm not getting anything more for it. Which is it doesn't make sense initially to the producers, but it almost becomes the price of entry to have a differentiated product.
Yeah, just to extend that a little bit, I think though when you look at the consumers, it depends on the consumer and where they're shopping. You know, if they're in Walmart, you know, you're not going to get a consumer as likely to pay for that. But again, if those values are aligned at the consumer level in the right retail environment that are there looking for better food, then they're more likely to appreciate that certification or that claim and ultimately then pay a premium.
Great.
It's two separate questions. Will the consumer pay more for having claims that it's important to them validated? Yes. If they won't, no, this is not going to work. Will a professional meat buyer for a large grocery company or food service company pay more for validated claims that they feel strongly about? No, they don't have the authority to do that. You know, they have the authority to make the best buy they can to serve the customers that are coming into their stores. So what's incumbent upon us is to pull it through, to make that claim valuable to the end consumer, in which case the meat buyer does have the authority to pay more for it because he can get more for it.
The experts have spoken, and I'm in full agreement.
I am as well. Consumers will pay to a certain extent. If they want a further differentiated product, they're going to have to pay a little bit more because it's going to take more certifications. And that's probably something we'll address is the multiple certifications. You know, the consumer is confused. We've talked internally in our department, in our program, that, you know, we don't want it to look like a NASCAR label out there. You know, how many can you put on there and still see the product? So we look at this issue continually, and we try to listen to the consumers, but we also have to put some reason, some common sense with it too. So that's really what we're trying to do, but some of our consumers will pay a lot. We want to sell more meat to more people, so we want different types of claims and certifications as well to be able to offer cost competitive products as well as maybe high-end products. So it's a challenge for us as well internally.
There's two opposing forces that are at play when we try to figure out a sweet spot for the right kind of certification. And this, the analog to this, in my experience, is when you're designing a food safety testing protocol. If you're going to test your ground beef for E. coli, you can design that test to pass, or you can design that test to find. And the results are very different. And certifications work the same way. We can design the certification to have minimal friction on the supply chain. So that means it's a low integrity certification. It's really just, all it really does is pretends to give the consumer some sort of assurance, but it's not auditable. If any consumer actually looked into it, they would find that it's relatively meaningless. Or we can design a certification program that's designed to protect the consumer from cheating and imposter products. That, however, is a much higher cost certification to get producers to comply with, and it provides friction on the supply chain. So if I'm trying to grow my supply chain by 30% a year, and I'm simultaneously putting restrictions on the supply chain because of a more rigorous certification program, somehow I have to find a sweet spot where those balance out. Can you guys, can you talk about your efforts to try to find that sweet spot? And I know it's a moving target, and we'll never get it right, but I'm curious to know how are you reconciling those two things?
That's a great question. I would say that we've probably had the most challenge in that area, right? Because we've created across 8 states, 8 many different ecosystems. We're trying to create a conservation grazing standard that's workable across that entire.
And that means something. I mean,
that means something.
That if I'm one of your members, that if I buy Audubon meat, I know that I'm actually having an impact on those grasslands.
Exactly. That's been a huge challenge, and we're kind of innovators in this space in the sense that we're kind of creating this from nothing. It's really never been done before on the conservation side of it, and so that has been an immense challenge. And I would have to say thank you to the many ranchers that are in this room right now that have stuck with us and been patient with us as we do that. And without you, we couldn't. And then there's probably a dozen or so of those ranches and ranchers in this room because we're creating a standard for ecosystems. We're creating a standard ultimately tied to what birds need, and not just one bird or 2 birds. And they all need something different. They all need a different kind of habitat, and we want to create a standard that speaks to their needs. And so that's been incredibly challenging, and we've always, for all of the advantages that we have in having a built-in base that's supportive of what we're doing, having membership and a name that is speaks to our mission and speaks to the claims that we're making on a product. For all of those benefits, I wouldn't say that the negative it's really just a challenge, and it's really just an accountability factor. They expect when we say a product's raised on bird-friendly land, that it absolutely is, and that product could be raised on bird-friendly land in Wyoming, but we have to create a standard that is relevant also in the Dakotas. So we've created regional standards, and that's helped out, but it's been incredibly challenging.
I think that speaking broadly, there are 2 kinds of verification certifications. There's the kind that people like us in this room seek, which we want to verify, certify, prove we're doing it different. And then there's the low-hanging fruit that I mentioned earlier that other producers want. They want to make it all seem like we're all doing the same thing. And that is highly effective, or has been highly effective, continues to be, because it confuses the consumer, so they just pick something up. But ultimately, doing it the right way will prevail. You know, we say you can hide everything but the sun and the moon and the truth. So if you just keep doing the right thing and telling people what you're doing, it's going to be all right.
I would concur. In our pursuit of certification, we felt fortunate to be able to find certification that really already has the dividing line on whether or not we're following our mission of nourishing soil, plants, cattle, and people by grazing cattle for their lifetime. So that really sums it up, and if we can certify that, that doesn't cut off our supply. Now, there could be certifications that we could pursue that may, but that's, you know, if we're following our mission, we're good, and our supply is good. So I don't see that constraint.
Two things. First, I would just like to, again, dovetail on Will, that he is right. And again, for those going direct to consumer, as you are, you know, working your way into the certifying process with AGA or whatever, because it is a process and you may not be able to pull it off right away. Get your stuff out and be transparent. And we take it for granted a bit because you're working in it every day. I got into argument after argument with my own mother about why she had to prove that she wasn't administering something to the cattle. She kept saying, how can I prove that I'm not doing something? It's like, because we're going to write it down. That's our first step, and we're going to be held accountable for it. That's our first step to customers. So being transparent and publish on your website, have a flyer or something when people come, that is your first step, and that's kind of your track in, right? Publish your truth. In terms of this dilemma, Todd, you know, I'll tell you what we did. I can't advise it to everybody. When I started, I made a decision we were not going to sell wholesale. Not going to. We were only going retail, direct to consumer, and we don't do restaurants. We just don't do it, and it's hard. But for this reason, because I knew that as we were building our supply chain, trying to build that producer network, it would put the wrong pressure on us. We wanted to really keep the integrity of the product in focus, and the integrity of what our, you know, my family's doing, our network was doing, and we couldn't do that trying to conform to 10,000 different claims. We had to be transparent with our consumers, put everything out there, but we made a tough decision that we're just going retail, and that's hard. It's hard. And now we're established enough to take a different route, but those are sometimes the kind of decisions you make as you're growing to keep the integrity of what you're doing. And you can do that when you're small, when you're in that direct market channel. So those kind of decisions are really oftentimes things you need to think about because they do put pressure on what you tried to set out and do in the first place.
How do you incentivize producers to? How do you grow your supply chain? So as we increase the integrity, or we raise the bar on what we need our producers to have third-party certified, how do we keep existing producers in our network and then incentivize others to join? That's less relevant for Leslie, probably.
Well, when we're truly in the regenerative ag space, what I have found is that I'm more reflecting what producers are already doing than I am getting them to change. So God bless the producers that do this without the credit and sometimes without the premium and sometimes a lot of times, almost all the time without the limelight. But we're more catching up and learning and reflecting what's happening, and that's great to see. I mean, it wasn't always that way.
No,
it wasn't always that way. Back in 2004, it wasn't that way.
No.
But fortunately, it's growing, and we can now say that about the certifications we're pursuing. So that's a wonderful thing, and it gets me up in the morning every day to just motivated to work with people who really are and want to be sincerely stewards of the land.
Matt nailed it. It starts out by doing business with the right people, right producers. I don't recommend anybody build a producer group the way we did it because we didn't know what we were doing. But our producer group is basically our friends and relatives and neighbors in my part of the country. And they were already doing the things that we're doing, which are the things that we're going to tout and talk about and be proud of. The hard part for us has been to get them to write it down. You know, that's been very difficult, and we handle that by making it as easy as we can for them. I can't tell you I pay them a whole lot more for when they become certified in something I ask them to certify in, but I make it easy for them. We pay for it. We pay the certification cost. We do a lot of the work for them. We make it easy for them. But as far as changing their behavior, there hadn't been a hell of a lot of that.
Yeah, it's not it's not about changing their behavior. It's exactly, I really think some of these obstacles now have nothing to do even with changing behavior. The obstacles are the paperwork and bureaucracy to get through to the claim. That's what we see with producers we've worked with, which is why I'm encouraging everybody to go home and just put your protocol. That's a great first step. Get something written down so you know what you do. Put it down in writing and paper. And it helps advance the whole industry forward, because then you have something tangible to say what I do on my farm. Yeah, it's really the bureaucracy and the paperwork of getting everything forward that is a struggle, and we all have to get maybe a little bit better at paperwork too, which is no fun.
I totally agree with what's been said already. My team members would tell you that I have a tendency to throw flash bombs or grenades in conversations. I'll say something inflammatory to start off a meeting, and it doesn't really carry the weight that it's said in, but it gets their attention. And one meeting here, probably 3 or 4 months ago, I said, we are not enrolling any more ranchers into the program. And everyone just, what do you mean? But I think they're used to it now. And really, we have had a lot of interest in this program. So finding producers that want to enroll in the program has really not been a huge issue for us. I think, oftentimes we're asked, how are ranchers receiving this Audubon Conservation Ranching certification, our program, and have you been chased off, any farms or ranches? And no, they've almost to a person, been very interested in enrolling in the program. What we have to do at this stage in the program is make it work for the ranchers that are in the program, and they're going to be, I think, our biggest advocates moving forward if we get it right. And so we've got a lot of producers that are interested, and we're at this place, and I didn't necessarily mean that we weren't going to enroll any more ranchers, but again, it did get their attention, that we want to be good service providers for those folks that are taking their time, going through the paperwork, and then the paperwork, and then the paperwork, because we're a certification with a third-party verification. So we're trying to work to make that as efficient as possible, but all the smiles and nods, you know what I mean when I say there's a lot to it. So.
Right. Agreed. We have a very long checklist for our suppliers that have to meet every single one of the recommendations or one of the requirements. We accept many of the animal welfare program certifying programs to give them some flexibility to choose which ones or one fits their program best. In addition to that, we have conversations, we have farm visits, we go to the slaughter facilities. We are out there talking with those prospective suppliers at length. And I think there's a couple in the room that know this is not an overnight decision for us to sign on a supplier. And when we do, we offer long-term contracts. So that's really where I think we incentivize especially people who are transitioning from maybe a conventional type production system to a higher welfare or a grass-fed type product, that to give them some security in that risk that they're taking to transition. So the long-term contracts really help. And the trust that we develop with our suppliers is part of the incentive as well. We continually talk with our suppliers every 2 weeks at least. So we really work to build the relationship. And again, we go in and try to tell the story and do videos for farmers. We have a whole library that we're working on to try to help tell your story that you're doing, because it's important for the entire industry.
That's a great lead into. Yes, you have a question? Yeah,
well-
we'll take a question.
Okay.
I got a few minutes.
I'm a consumer, and some of my best friends are consumers. And I don't know, I'm sure you've done a lot of market research and you have a lot of experience, and I don't know what you found out from whom when. And I'm all for the certification and as much public for this as possible. But when I go into Whole Foods and I look for meat, I find packages that say grass-fed hamburger. They don't say 100% grass-fed hamburger. They don't say pasture-raised grass-fed hamburger. The meat that comes prepackaged does, if that's what it is, but consumers don't understand the differences between those things. And I think that one of the best things you could do at this point for consumer education is insist that it says pasture-raised, grass-fed. And people will notice that other packages don't say that. And I think that's an important educational piece that you can do pre-certification.
Right. I don't know that we're gonna. Come back next year, and maybe we'll cover what USDA will allow you to say on the package next year, because I don't think we have time to start with that. But your point is well taken. If I can paraphrase your point, it's confusing as hell to look at a label and try to figure out what it actually means. Is that fair?
Yes, and I explain it to people who are shopping
Right.
next to me in
Right.
Whole Foods that this is and that isn't.
You know, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I don't understand what all those claims on some of the product mean. So that's part of the problem, is that there's so much confusion there that it's very, very hard to cut through that noise with 2 or 3 words on a package. Because the moment you do, someone else, a competitor who doesn't have our high integrity standards, will try to game that. And they'll use the same words, but they don't mean the same thing that they meant when it was on my package. So we're not going to be able to solve that today, and I want to keep our focus tight. I do want to talk briefly to riff on something that Dr. Thompson said about the story. You tell a story. And I think in my experience, that's the best way to articulate why we're different. Yes, we need to have some claims, and yes, we probably need to have those claims third-party verified, but it's not just the third-party verification, it's the story that we can tell. Because somebody that has what I call a very low-integrity claim, they can't shoot a video. They can't tell that story. It's not a very robust story, and the more we do that, the more obvious it is between the high-integrity stories and the low-integrity stories. What they have is a picture of a barn on a website with no information about producers' names, no information about processing facilities, no personal information at all. And it doesn't take, you don't have to be a very smart consumer to tell the difference between that and a website that has a whole bunch of video with people, not just a picture of a barn, but actual people raising animals and telling why they do what they do. And collectively, we have a really powerful story here. And one of the things we have to do is relentlessly tell that story in a way that's authentic, and we have to show enough of ourselves that it's impossible for somebody who's attempting to use an industrial model but use the same words on the package. It's impossible for them to come up with the same kind of a story and the same kind of a video. Can you talk just a little bit, as a last question, about what do you do to try to tell that story to make this, your differentiator, real for consumers?
Yeah, it's a good question. For the direct-to-consumer market, first, again, I'd like to say, get some of these cost of entry things out of the way so you can get to the story. So that the story is not no antibiotics or no growth hormones administered. Those are really what I would call cost of entry points that, you have to talk to our consumer. So get that out of the way. Get that, again, that's your protocols, et cetera. Then ask yourself, why am I doing this? When we look around this room, people are doing this for what is your why? Because that's going to be your consumer's why. Tell your why. And one of the best ways to do that, quite honestly, with whatever your communication vehicle is, we're online, so I can speak to online, is by being vulnerable a little bit with your consumer. That's what consumers want. They want that personal connection, and being vulnerable and putting yourself out on the table as their producer, as their brand, is how you build that trust and equity for whatever your why is. So it's, when you're telling your story, your why, whether it's for sustainability, soil health, climate change, whatever it is, the story has to include the ups and downs, uglies, everything. And that is compelling, really compelling. And that's the way you build your brand and build your scale. But I think that's really underestimated as a differentiator. That is a differentiator between commodity, because commodity doesn't tell a story, ever. And it's not vulnerable. In fact, it's the opposite of vulnerable, right? Everything feels hidden and non-transparent. But that's what establishes that personal relationship, especially, which is so important in the direct market. So it's really letting that shine through in your communication vehicles.
After being raised on a grass-based multi-species farm and wanted to get the hell away from it as fast as I could and go to college and work in the conventional food industry, I was in marketing. And in that day and age, there was really, if you wanted to market directly to the consumer with a message, let alone a product, with just a message, you had to spend millions of dollars every year, every quarter, to get any kind of message to stick with any consumer. Now we have the great fortune of social media and the internet, which, we talk about it a lot. But it really is big for being able to be any size, and whether you're marketing direct or you're going through distribution, you can still tell that story in a multitude of ways, and it takes a whole puzzle to put this together from all the different forms of social media, website, in-store demos in our case, all the different touch points. But those touch points exist, and I can build a little bit on what Will said earlier too, and said we got to pull it through, because really what we're all doing to get this value and to make our products and businesses and farms go is educate. We're educating. So what's the biggest platform we can educate from? We should hop on that platform and educate every day, because then those consumers will go out, and once they have some level of education, they will go out and vote with their dollars. And ultimately that is what is pushing this industry forward, because again, it would take millions of dollars, and you'd have to go through gatekeepers, and you can do all that. And now any brand, any direct-to-consumer can do this with a concerted effort without the millions of dollars.
When I went to the University of Georgia back in the 70s, I could have majored in advertising or marketing or public relations, but I chose to major in animal science. And now, 40 years later, I'm a media whore. And I'm not embarrassed about it. We are fiercely proud of our land and our animals and our people and our system. And we like talking about it, and we like showing people And we built cabins so people could come spend the night with us and see it, and restaurants so we could feed them while they were there, and we enjoy having them. Our advertising budget is just a little bit less than zero. But when somebody says they want to come and do a video or blog, or, we say, yes, sir, you could tweet and Twitter. But we're proud to have them. We really, I mean, we enjoy what we do, and we're proud of it. So we like showing it to them, and it's been a great benefit to us business-wise.
Telling a story, a compelling story that moves people to action, and action in terms of with their wallets is never easy. But with birds, and birds are the prism through which we view our work, birds are as charismatic as they are imperiled in this ecosystem, in this region. And so to connect the story of a third, fourth, or fifth generation ranch with what they're doing for wildlife and birds that we all share in common is an incredible advantage for us. And so we're testing things out, and with how we tell that story, that's going to be one of the most important things that we do for and with our ranching partners and our market partners, is be the best at telling that story about clean water and the things that birds need: clean water, open spaces, clean spaces, and places to breed and nest and move. That's a really important aspect of our entire program, and we're lucky enough to have really charismatic subjects like birds and wildlife to tell that story. So storytelling is every bit a part of our program, for sure.
I did mention the videos, extensive website talking about our practices, what we do, how we do it maybe differently. We don't have a lot of time to try to educate the retail buyer. And with many different brands that have similar claims, and our product might be a little bit higher priced, how do we convince those retailers to put our product on the shelf? And that's something that we all face. So we've even gone so far as to taking our retailers that are on the fence to farm tours as well. And as an animal scientist and the animal welfare manager, I'm the first one to put the brakes on and say, no, we can't do that. Because we have to consider the animals. We don't want a group of 10 people coming into the barns. These are not tour farms. These are real farms. No, we can't be there at 8 o'clock in the morning because they have chores to do. You know, we have to work with their schedule, and we're going to limit the number of people that can come, and we're going to go through all of the biosecurity practices. And I know that I sound like a wet blanket, but the animal welfare is at heart to this. So they get all of the rules before they can come. And we've even had one that said, can you take us to one of your lowest standards, your basic bottom standards? And of course, as a business, we wanted to take them to the premier, I was like, well, okay, we'll do it. We will do it. And it was an extremely rewarding experience. A strong relationship has developed. They even wanted to go to the slaughter facility. And again, I'm saying, no, we don't need to do that. We're not going to be able to hear each other. They insisted, we complied, and it was very positive, much better than I anticipated. So again, you have to be very transparent, open to communication, do what you need to do to tell the truth, to tell the story, to show what you do. So it's challenging, it's expensive, it's time consuming, but in the long run, it will work for you.
Thank you all. Thanks for participating.